Donkey Kong 64 has a 90 on Metacritic. It's crazy because I feel like so much of anytime Donkey Kong 64 is brought up now, it's like in the context of kind of the black sheep or like the weird one.
There's some interview somewhere where some Rare devs were talking about the transition from banjo-kazooie to banjo-tooie, and
It sold really well. It had 90% on Metacritic, so I guess it's more of a recent invention that this game's like super controversial.
it was just so beautiful to me. It completely changed my thinking on
What's your favorite game? Come on the show, let me pick your brain. We've all got favorite games. No takes too insane here on Your Fave Game.
Hey everybody, I'm your host Josh Busker, and welcome to another exciting episode of Your Fave Game, the online talk show where we chat with some of the most creative people from across the internet and ask them the question that's kind of in the title of the series, what's your favorite game? Today we are joined by Brian Henken, a game designer and YouTuber with a focus on high quality and incredibly personal video essays. How you doing today, Brian?
I'm doing great. I kind of, most people don't pronounce my last name correctly on the first try, but you
Did
got
I do it right?
That was it. That was perfect.
Yes.
I get a lot of Henken, but you got Henken right off the bat. I'm doing
Nice.
great. It's been a good day. I'm happy to be here.
Nice. I'm really excited to talk about the game we're talking about today. So yeah, I guess just getting right into it. Before I ask you kind of the titular question, is this a difficult question for you, like figuring out what your favorite video game is?
It was at first, because if someone's asking me my favorite game, I'm typically in there's two schools of thought that I immediately come to, and it's just what game is more fun to play in a more like classic video game sense of just it feels good in your hands. The core gameplay loop is really fun. Something like Super Mario 64, Celeste, even something like Skyrim or The Witcher 3, like something that like it just feels fun to play in a very like almost utilitarian sense. And then there are the games where it's like, well, maybe it's not the most fun to sit down and play all the time, but it affected you in like a really like deeply personal way. And I always come back to those games as being like the ones that are my favorite. A lot of those games are ones that I don't typically play all the time, as opposed to like other ones. Like I was talking to a friend of mine how like just this year I've 100% in Super Mario 64 like 4 times because it just feels so good to play.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
But the game that I'm here to talk about today, I've finished one time in my life. So it's just
Okay, yeah.
strange how I arrive at calling it my favorite.
It's an interesting thing you bring up because there is those like, yeah, games that just they're mechanically satisfying. Like there is the visual and like sound aspect. Like it might feel really good through those aspects, but like it's really just it feels good to like hold the controller in my hand and do what I need to do to like play the game. Yeah, Super Mario 64 and like a lot of games just you get in that flow state and it feels really good. But then there's also games that like as an artistic statement or like a standalone work, like, yeah, they stick with you and you might only play them the once, but the things it makes you feel or just even that one experience is going to stick with you so long that it's like, yeah, that was one of the best experiences I've ever had.
Yeah, it's just like the huge distinction between something like, Penny's Big Breakaway or like classic Donkey Kong Country as compared to like The Last of Us, something like that. It's like they're their own things. They're not like super comparable. They're just great in their own different ways.
And I think that's really cool that video games have like gotten to the point where like what is a video game or like what the game is pursuing. Like I feel like initially video games had a lot more of just that kind of mechanical thing. They're essentially just like digital virtual toys and everything. But we've kind of, as the medium has grown and like become more of an art form, people are realizing like, oh, we can like use interactive like fiction and everything to tell a really good story about like revenge or grief or like stuff that might not be like fun topics, but not to get too kind of pretentious with it, but are like parts of the human condition and everything and like does what art's supposed to do.
I think that shift definitely comes around like, maybe like the Nintendo 64 PS1 era, because it's like, 1989 or 88, Game Boy launches and it comes out with Tetris, and it's just, well, yeah, Tetris just feels really good to play. And it's sure, maybe that's a constraint of the hardware, maybe that's just, they could have, I mean, were there many Game Boy RPGs? I don't think there were. There might have been like a few.
There's like a couple. I know there was like Final Fantasy spin-offs. I'm not a huge like RPG guy, so I'm sure there's someone like that's going to come into the comments and be like, actually, this game for released in 1991 was pinnacle to the JRPG genre for this reason.
Someone's screaming at their monitor right now.
Yeah, there's probably something, but I get what you mean. Where like initially, because of those hardware limitations, like it would be very hard to like do The Last of Us on a Game Boy.
Oh man, Link's Awakening. Have you played Link's Awakening?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, like that one is like, that pulls at your heartstrings for sure.
You definitely can do emotional stories and everything. And it is like a thing where like over time, I guess we got more tools and more ways to kind of access those emotions. But it definitely was, if you wanted to make an emotional story, it was then just kind of the trick of like, well, how do I get these feelings across whenever I have to tell this story with like a black and white, like 8-bit sprite and everything. But they find ways, and like through gameplay or through like just incredible music, even if it's beeps and boops, like those melodies still like they connect to you, they get you.
It's funny, the video that I'm working on now, actually, like, I guess I can kind of spoil it. It's not like a huge deal, but well, no, it is a giant deal. I don't know what I'm talking about. But there's it's all about video game music, and I have a segment of the video where I got to sit down for a little bit and talk with Breno Floss. I don't know if you know who that is.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
Super cool dude. But he raised a point similar to what you were saying, where like, yeah, it is just beeps and boops, but they stick with you because a lot of the time, like back then, like NES, Game Boy era, the music, it had to be good. So like that's like a huge part of it. But now we have like infinitely more avenues to really get at someone's heartstrings and mess with them. And it's super cool because there's just a lot, like there's just so many different ways you can approach it, and I love that now. But there's something to be said with it feeling a little bit more special back in the day when you're playing like Earthbound on your SNES, and it's like, oh wow, this hurts in like a kind of a nice way. I wasn't really expecting this from the machine that I play Yoshi's Island on.
Not to get like too philosophical or like sentimental with it, but like I do think often about that I feel lucky to be kind of living through like the early days of kind of like video games as an art form. Cause like I hope a century like from now, video games are still a thing and still something that's been like progressing forward. And so it's super cool that we're like alive in the period where they're figuring out like how to make like these interactive like bits of software and games like an actual art form and a cohesive thing, and are figuring out like, oh, this is how we like connect to people with music, or like these are the gameplay visuals that really work for the project that I'm trying to do. And we're in that like era of exploration, and just more and more things keep getting uncovered. I love it.
It's super cool to see it unfold. I remember the first game I ever played was Super Mario World. The second game I ever played was the original Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. And it's like, those are very gamey games for sure. And then I remember, I mean, it couldn't have been much later, but playing the original Kingdom Hearts for the first time. Like, I mean, you're a kid back then, so you don't notice it, but now it's like that game has like, super cringy dialogue, kind of a weird story. The premise is a little funky, but it's done well. But as a kid, I remember thinking like, okay, this is something else now. This isn't just a game that I'm playing to get like a high score, like complete a stage. Like, this is now bordering on something that's a lot more artful, which is kind of funny to be saying about Kingdom Hearts, because surface level Kingdom Hearts,
Goofy and Donald,
yeah, it's just so funny. But now to see that blossom into what we have today is like, it's super cool to say. It was like I was there kind of on the ground floor to really see that happen. I might have been 6, but I was there.
Yeah, no, we were still there to like see that transition from like 2D to 3D, or like even just like the graphics jump from like Nintendo 64 to GameCube was
mind blowing,
like, huge, like crazy.
I remember like being just absolutely floored seeing the water in Super Mario Sunshine, And I think I told like my
Yes.
brother or a neighbor of mine, I was describing the game to them, and I was like, the water looks more real than it does at the beach, at the real beach. Like it's so realistic.
I love that. The one for me was Star Wars Rogue Squadron 2, Rogue Leader.
Yeah.
It was one of the launch titles for the GameCube. And I remember when we got that for Christmas, like freaking out because it was like, oh my God, all of the like spaceships and like AT-ATs, they look like they're made of Legos. And that was me like realizing, oh, you can see like the individual like parts on them. And if I go back and look at the graphics like now, it's like, okay, I've definitely like they have higher quality models in the movies and everything, but at the time it was like mind blowing. Like, oh my God, you could see like the little antennas on them. Like it's not just a block roaming around like it would have to be on the N64.
Yeah, your brain doesn't have to do much, because on the N64 it's like, yeah, this is like kind of the shapes and kind of the
Mm-hmm.
looks of some of these, ships and characters and places, but your brain kind of has to do a lot of the rest of the work.
Yeah, a little
You,
bit of
to
imagination. Yeah.
not have to like stretch your imagination that much is like super cool. 'Cause it's like,
Mm-hmm.
wow, it's just getting to be more of a real experience that I can like imagine is like kind of real in its own sort of virtual sense. I
Mm-hmm.
love that stuff.
So yeah, I guess next we should ask the name of the show. So Brian, we've talked a lot about video games and like kind of the beginning of the art form, but now we're going to talk about a very ambitious game, I think. So what is your favorite game, Brian?
Oh man, when you initially asked me, it was a toss up between this game and Kingdom Hearts. But Kingdom Hearts would have just it's a little bit of a step below for me, and I knew if I talked about that, it would have just been like a lore conversation for like
Mm.
for the duration. But easily, like I don't even really have to think about it that hard. It's Donkey Kong 64. I love that game more than any other, and probably always will.
I am so excited to talk about this game because it's a controversial one on the internet these days, but I am determined to make my brand the defending ambitious Rareware platformer sequels. And so Donkey Kong 64, Banjo-Tooie, Donkey Kong Country 3, all of them. I love all those games and I will stand for them any day. So I am excited to talk about Donkey Kong 64.
I still think it's like a stretch to say any of those games are bad games, though.
I 100% agree. And you know what? Actually, just before we even get into talking about Donkey Kong 64, I want to set a record straight for the internet because I was doing usually before I record an episode, if I haven't actually like replayed the game in a while, I'll give like a scan of the Wikipedia page or I'll try to like just refresh myself a little bit. Um Donkey Kong 64 has a 90 on Metacritic.
Let's go. Come on. It's so good.
It's crazy because I feel like so much of like anytime Donkey Kong 64 is brought up now, it's like in the context of like, oh, it's like kind of the black sheep or like the weird one of like either Rareware's collectathon platformers or like the Nintendo 64 in general. It's like collection of platformers. People just always like, oh yeah, Donkey Kong 64, that didn't that have like too many characters? Like I feel like it is one of those games that's really been impacted by either like YouTubers having takes on it that just get popularized or just kind of certain facts about it getting repeated. So it was surprising to kind of look at the Wikipedia page and be like, oh, this was received really well during the day. Like this was the big game for the holidays in 1999, apparently. Like it sold really well. It had 90% on Metacritic. So I guess it's more of a recent invention that this game's like super controversial.
I think that Donkey Kong 64's launch may have just been that might have been the beginning of the whole bigger is better kind of argument for video games where, a game would come out even in like the late 2000s, early 2010s, where it's like, a new open world RPG and they're like, this map is 2 times the size of Skyrim or 5 times
Yeah.
the size of X game. And Donkey Kong 64, if you look at a lot of like the original marketing for it, they're like, this game is so big we had to expand the system memory because it couldn't fit on a cartridge. It's so gigantic you're not even gonna know what to do with yourself. And it doesn't feel horribly big when I play it. I think a lot. I think that's part of it, but I think a lot of the gripes that people carry for Donkey Kong 64 are not like super unfounded, but they're definitely taken to a level of you might be letting it have so too much power over you. I like
Mm-hmm.
people will say like, oh, there's too many collectibles. Like constant swapping of characters is annoying, and it's like, yeah, sure, but even for me, like that's like I recognize that these problems are there, but they never soured the experience for me. I was able to look past it and accept that it's part of the game, it's part of the experience. And I know a lot of people will say like it's annoying that there's so much backtracking, and it's frustrating that I constantly have to go back to swap out characters. But I think even that can serve a purpose of just I find a door and it's like I can't open this with, Diddy Kong. I have to open this with Chunky Kong. So you have to go back to an area where you swap characters. But in doing that, you're kind of better acquainting yourself with the layout of that level, and you're really getting a lay of the land to where you're learning the more that you have to backtrack. It's very
Mm.
similar to like a Metroid game or something, a Castlevania like post Symphony of the Night. And I think there's some value to that. I think there's some merit there. I always see some of those arguments as like some people might be coming at it at the wrong angle, or just kind of ready to dog on the game before they've even really given it a chance.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of people, like if you were going to go in and you hadn't played Donkey Kong 64 before and you were going to try it out today, you probably would have like heard a little bit like, oh, the character swapping and backtracking is a lot. Like you might have heard that. And then if you're going into the game and your goal is to like experience it and just I want to beat this and like check it off like my backlog, you're going to go in and you probably are going to have like a slow time with it and or feel like wow, there is a lot of like having to like, oh, I realize I don't actually have the right Kong to pick up these bananas, so I got to run back here and everything. And I guess I can see that being frustrating if your only goal is to like get to the end of the game, that would take like longer than you'd think. But whenever you'd like play this as a kid, like whenever you were the target audience in 1999, you weren't playing Donkey Kong 64 to roll the credits and hop onto the next game in your backlog. You were like, Donkey Kong 64 might be the only video game you're going to have, or like new game you're going to have for like 6 months. So it was just a cartridge you'd always have, and you just slowly would explore more and more and have that golden banana counter get higher and higher. And it wasn't supposed to be something that you were like trying to get to the end to as efficiently as possible. You were just supposed to live in that world for as long as you could.
Yeah, I think it is definitely an issue of perception and sort of like treating it as a checklist. There's some interview somewhere where some rare devs were talking about the transition from banjo-kazooie to banjo-tooie, and they mentioned that they're really influenced by Ocarina of Time and the design of that game, and so they tried to see how they could take that sort of design and apply it to banjo. And you can definitely see a lot of that in Donkey Kong 64. Like Tooie and
Mm-hmm.
Donkey Kong 64 are very similar games.
Mm-hmm.
So if you kind of go into it and you don't treat it as a typical 3D platformer and more of an adventure game,
Mm-hmm.
similar to early Zelda, then you're probably gonna like it a lot more, I think. And to add more to what you said about, it's the only game you're gonna have for, however many months, you kind of have to get lost in it. That's exactly the reason why I like that game so much. Is that
Mm-hmm.
I think it may have been for a long time when I got my Nintendo 64 as a child that it was Super Mario 64 and Donkey Kong 64 were just about the only games I had. And so I spent a lot of time with those two games, more so with Donkey Kong 64, just because I think I thought it looked nicer. It was more graphically
Mm-hmm.
impressive to me. But over time, I just became so acquainted with the world, and I liked it. I liked being in it so much that it became almost its own reality outside of my bedroom where I mentioned it in the video I made on it where I said I could almost tell you what, the sun felt like on my face. I could tell you what temperature the water in the ocean was. But it's
Mm.
because I spent so much time there and I really valued my time there. And finding a new level or a new secret area or a new section of a world that I didn't even realize was there was always this, giant, like huge discovery. It felt like I was an explorer just like charting uncharted Donkey Kong for the first time, and
Hmm.
everything was exciting. And I feel like now, as games have started to become more of a checklist where people have their backlogs, people want to platinum like every game that they play, it's kind of hard to view Donkey Kong 64 as a world, as a reality, which is what I feel like may have been the intention from the developers of, let's make a world that's so easy for people to get lost into, and let's make it as convincing as we can. I mean, the music draws you in. There's really advanced lighting effects, especially for the Nintendo 64, and the worlds are designed in such a way to where it is really intriguing to explore them. That like final, well, not the final, but one of the last levels, the crystal caves. You're walking through some caves
Mm.
and like it's all sparkly and kind of dark, and then you turn a corner and all of a sudden there's like a big waterfall. What's on the other side of that waterfall? You find like this old like abandoned cabin. You want to like, it just prods your imagination so much. That was a super long like run on thought, but it just sort of serves to like at least kind of explain where my love lies in terms of Donkey Kong 64.
Hmm. And I think I super agree with that, because I usually talk more about like Banjo-Tooie than Donkey Kong 64 as like the ambitious one that I'll defend, because that seems to be like the major complaint that people bring up for both like Banjo-Tooie and Donkey Kong 64. Is not even that like any aspects of it are bad, it's that there's like too much of stuff. Like there's like too much or too many collectibles in Donkey Kong 64, or like in Banjo-Tooie, like there's too many connections and too many times you need to like go in between like the different levels and everything. And on some level, like I can totally understand that, because I feel like the original Banjo-Kazooie is just like a very well paced and like it's it's just a well sized game. Like I think it works kind of like from a lot of different angles, but I think even if Banjo Tooie and Donkey Kong 64 are a bit like big, or even if I use a more negative term like bloated, I think there's still a value to that, because it still feels ambitious. They're putting in like more effort into these worlds than some games would, and just because of those little extra things, yeah, something just connects that little bit more.
I think both of those design ethos have their place. Like you can simultaneously love the quick, simple, like really effective charm of Banjo Kazooie, where it's like quick platforming challenge, you got your jiggy, and then you can also appreciate Banjo Tooie, or even by extension Donkey Kong 64, where there's multiple parts to a solution. That can feel really good when you've finally figured out what it is you're supposed to do and then actually achieving it. I think both can exist, and it's I think both should exist. That way you're able to really like dial in, what works, what doesn't work. So that way when you have something like, ukulele, which is like a more like modern sort of like trying to recapture the old spirit of those games, you can find out like, what did people really like and what can we build on, or try to make it better.
Hmm.
I think it unfortunately kind of caters to two different type of people, where it's like,
Hmm.
the people that might have a little more patience than others, and people that, kind of want their, super tight, quick 3D platform game. Not that there's anything wrong with either of those, ways of approaching a game, but
Hmm.
I think they both have their place, and I don't really see anything as being bad, because the opposite person can say like, I boot up Banjo Kazooie, I walk into Grunty's lair and the first Jiggy's just there. I go to Mumbo's mountain and the
Yeah.
first Jiggy's just kind of like on top of the hill and I don't really have to do much. there's always some way that you can kind of spin it to be like, this isn't for me. Though, I mean, don't get me wrong, there are things that can be pretty inherently bad, but I feel like a lot of it is just all about the way you approach it.
I'm actually like visualizing the alternate universe now where the like kind of, I guess, mainstream opinion that like trickles down from YouTube over the years is that actually Banjo-Kazooie is too basic. Like Banjo-Tooie is where it's at. Banjo-Tooie is the masterpiece that they need to bring back. Banjo-Kazooie, it's too small.
Rare really hit their stride with Banjo-Tooie.
Yeah.
Can't wait for it. Can't wait for them to really add some of that into Sea of Thieves.
So, here's actually a question. Is there anything you change about Donkey Kong 64? Is there anything that you think, because you obviously like it for very like specific reasons, both like personal reasons of like growing up with the game and having a like unique attachment to it, and also just appreciating that like feeling of living in a world. Is there anything that you think it could do better to kind of add in those effects, or is there anywhere where you think it goes too far in like the ambitious like direction?
I mean, there are a few things where it's like it's small nitpicks. Like there's a fly swatter MIDI game where
Oh.
the fly swatter does not like connect with the thing you're trying to swat, even though it very very clearly did. Or certain things where it's like collision's a little weird, so sometimes you'll accidentally clip through a wall. But I think a better way for me to kind of approach the question is, it's something that I think about like way too much, is that if I were to be in charge, I'm charged with Nintendo, or from Nintendo, with creating a from the ground up remake of Donkey Kong 64. Like, what would I change? What would I omit? What would I add in? I think realistically what I would do is I would want to leave Donkey Kong 64 as it is, for the main reason of just like, I'd like to preserve that as best as I could. Like, Donkey Kong 64 is like the perfect window into 1999 for me, because it's I explained it really well in the video I made, called A Love Letter to Donkey Kong 64, where I talk about how Donkey Kong 64 is like this really perfect window into who I was as a child. If I'm to go back and try to remember things from when I was 5 or 6 years old, it's a little difficult. I might have a couple of things that I can pull. But if I play Donkey Kong 64, I can remember how I felt. I can remember, waking up some mornings as a child, in my much much smaller bed, and going out and playing with my friends outside. I can remember, driving in the car with my mom. I can remember being taught to ride my bike, all because I have a lot of those memories sort of locked within areas of Donkey Kong 64. So I'd want to keep it as it is, because I feel like it should be preserved, because maybe I'm not the only one who feels that way. And there's intent and there's passion behind a lot of what went into the original, and I wouldn't want to squash what Rare did and write it off as, something that's bad, or even something that didn't age well, because it's, at the end of the day, it is what it is, and it was what it was. And to deny that ever was the case, I think, is just a shame. So my remake of Donkey Kong 64 would have like a classic mode for you to play the game as it is, maybe like a Master Chief Collection-esque, select button that changes the graphics back, or something like that. But if I were to sort of modernize the game, or make it something that I would enjoy playing a little bit more, I would definitely, visuals are number one. Obviously you would want to like spruce them up, add in some higher quality textures, add in some more some higher poly count models. The one thing that's always kind of frustrated me is how in the hub world, and I hate to ruin this for anyone who likes this game who has not noticed this, but the water is just a flat texture of caustics that is static. The water is not animated, even though in banjo-kazooie the water was animated in a lot of places. I don't think there were many areas where the water wasn't, so it's just I can't not notice that. So there are little like graphical things I'd fix while trying to like retain the look and feel of each of those spaces. And I know this kind of contradicts what I said earlier, but man, Donkey Kong 64, there's a D-pad on the Nintendo 64 controller. They could have just used that to let you switch the characters, and they didn't. So I think I'd add that in as a sort of, option. Like, hey, if you really are the type of person to where having to backtrack as much as you do have to in that game is going to annoy you, here's, something else to make it a little bit more approachable. I don't think something like that would compromise the integrity of the game too much. And for me, I only see it as opening up the game for more, like, for different types of people to be able to enjoy it.
Yeah, for people where that is like a sticking point.
Yeah, because I want them to be able to see Donkey Kong 64 for how I see it. I tell my friends all the time that it's my favorite game, and it is almost received as sort of a joke, but it's true. Like, I do love that game for what it is. So yeah, there's things I'd change. And I might, it's little things, it's a lot of little nitpicks, but Nintendo, if you're listening, I've made a couple of games in my time. I mean, if you just ask me, I'm not that busy.
Nintendo, hire this man.
I could just do it if you really want me to.
That was actually it was one of the questions that I'd written down to get your thoughts on. There is kind of a decent fan community still around Donkey Kong 64, especially in regards to there's the Donkey Kong 64 randomizer.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, I haven't played a whole lot of it myself. I'm mostly into the Zelda randomizers and everything, which again is Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. Super improved by fan mods in like the randomizer that are like, hey, we have this D-pad. What if we put like the changing tunics and the boots on there instead of having to pause, scroll, click, unpause, do the thing, pause, like all that. So I haven't played as much of the Donkey Kong 64 randomizer, but I know it has kind of one of the bigger collectathon scenes for that. And one of the big things that they modded in just to make the randomizer like go smoother is you can use, I think it might be just the R and L buttons, and you'd swap between which Kong you currently are.
Oh yeah, because those buttons they're not used either, I don't think, like at all.
Yeah. It's either the D-pad or the L or R, just something that they have available, but just you can instantly, like if you're Chunky, you see some Diddy Kong bananas, you can switch over to Diddy, pick them up, and go right back to Chunky. I was going to ask you what your thoughts are on that, of the fandom community kind of taking it upon themselves to make mods to improve the quality of life, but I guess also like that is making a change to the overall design of the game. But I liked hearing you say that you're okay with that because it opens it up to people that might be a deal breaker for them. And if it's not a deal breaker, you just don't have to use that feature.
Oh yeah. Like, I mean, if it's between that or, there are very clear loading zones in that game. So if it's like, oh, this new remake gets rid of all of the hallways connecting areas, just so there's more like, flow through the level. I would hate that, but making it just so you can swap a character wherever, I feel like that's unintrusive. That's totally fine and just opens it up for more people to be able to play.
I'm sure there's lots of people that would like debate where exactly that line is on where something changes from being like a quality of life change to like actually changing like a decent part of the game itself. But yeah, I think most people would be like, yeah, I'm okay with not having to like wander back to that barrel like every single time I want to switch a Kong out.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's moments when I've played it, and I'll be in a point where it's like I'm playing as Donkey Kong, and I just got somewhere where Tiny Kong's face is, and it's like I don't want to go all the way back. I'd rather die. I don't think I want to do that.
So you've said a big thing with Donkey Kong 64 for you is that at the time, like the graphics and the sound were really engaging to you, and just living in the world felt really important to you. Did you have like any favorite locations in the game? Like, is there a specific world or like a part of a specific level that like sticks out to you? Or
Oh yeah, easy. It's gonna be like almost, I don't want to say cliche, but probably like maybe the standard answer, if that's a better way to describe it. But and it's something that I talk about in the video that I'm working on now. But there is a moment like right at the beginning of the game where the tutorial area is just, you're in the jungle, it's quiet, it's very tranquil, it's very chilled out. Kind of like a really good area for you to just get your bearings and figure out how Donkey Kong moves. But then once you're done with the tutorial, you go kind of outside, and immediately it opens up. You can see like, you know, K. Rool's Mechanical Island. You can see the Banana Fairy Islands. You can, go just about to the top of DK Isle. Like, it's all there. And you see the ocean stretching out into the distance, the sun's in the sky, and the music that is playing. When I was a child, that song just hit me in such a way to where I one was just like, this is one of the best songs I've heard in a video game. It was just so beautiful to me, and it completely just changed my thinking on music. Because as a child, I mean, like, you're only listening to what your mom or dad plays in the car, or what's on the radio, which at the time was like NSYNC and Britney Spears, like a lot of like, late 90s, early
Backstreet
2000s
was
pop.
back.
Backstreet was 100% back.
Allegedly.
Allegedly. But and that's all good stuff. That's all fun music, but this was different. I just thought it was so beautiful, and I was like, there's something that has meaning to it to me. There's something that's worth chasing. And ever since that moment, like, I knew that music was going to be a thing in my life that was very important to me, whether it was appreciating it or making it. I mean, it later turned into making music, but that was one of those moments where immediately I was like, this is something that's going to go with me for the rest of my life. And so beach area of DK Isle is extremely important to me, and has stayed with me for just about the rest of my life, and will continue on. And then another one besides that is the lobby for the Crystal Caves level. I just think that is such a like cozy space, and I just, when I'm in there, like, I hear the very like echoey marimba, which is like a crazy clean sample for a Nintendo 64 era game.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I hear that, and I'm in that room, and like I feel safe. I feel like everything's gonna be okay. And so a little bit of a tangent, but sometimes when I feel like, when I'm making music and I'm like, my brain's just not there, I can't come up with anything good, I will like remake some of my favorite songs. And so one of them ended up turning into like a very short album of just me recreating a lot of my favorite songs from Donkey Kong Country 1, 2, and Donkey Kong 64. And I made sure to include that song. So I'm like, it's just something about it. It just feels cozy. It feels safe. I just love it. It's music is a huge part of why that game is so important to me. So, but a lot of it is tied to like the specific areas of the game.
Grant Kirkhope did an incredible job on that soundtrack. And yeah, just everything the hub area in general, like one of my favorite hub areas in all of gaming. There's that, I forget the name of it. There's like a website you can go to that lets you like kind of explore around like Nintendo 64, like GameCube era, like levels.
Website.
Yeah. Whenever I first found out about that place, the DK64 hub world was like the first place I checked out, because I was just like, this is like the ideal hub world for a video game. It's just so good. And yeah, the music, like on its own, just compositionally, is really, really good. And I know like banjo-kazooie and like a lot of other video games do this, where the music changes depending on like what area you're in, or if you go underwater, like the instruments will change.
Yeah.
But like DK64 does that so hard and like so well, because like whenever you go out on the beach, it's like the nice, like it's soft but it's like majestic and hopeful, the like da 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 and all that. And then whenever you like get to the, or if you go near like K Rool's place or anything like that, like you start getting the little like honking like trombone or
Yep.
like tuba in the background, like adding just a little bit of like menace to it. And like it's just,
Like
yeah,
a
it's
minor
so
key
so
version.
good.
It's so good.
Yeah.
Like the Banjo-Kazooie soundtrack is really good, and I love it. It's incredible. But man, if I had been much older and I'm back in 1998, and I'm maybe like a teenager, and I find out that they're making a Donkey Kong game. It's going to be 3D. It's going to be a big leap forward, and they're taking David Wise off of Donkey Kong. I would have been like really mad. I would have been like upset because David Wise's Donkey Kong Country soundtracks are incredible. But man, like Grant Kirkhope, when he got the job for Donkey Kong 64, he just walked into that studio and turned into a psychopathic murderer, killing every single track that he got his hands on. It's beautiful. It's
I think
so
that
close to
even,
perfect.
I think it makes Donkey Kong, like obviously Banjo-Kazooie, Banjo-Tooie, any of Kirkhope's soundtracks are amazing, but I think DK64 almost sticks out to me a little more because he had to kind of take the baton from both David Wise and Evelyn Fisher, because she was on 3 and she also helped out on 1. And someone in
Really,
my
I didn't even
comments
know
section,
that.
I didn't know that either, but someone in my comments section called me out in the Donkey Kong Country 3 episode just because I wasn't mentioning her, and that was my own fault for just not knowing how involved she was in the original trilogy. So I just wanted to mention her name now to give her credit, since I'm doing a bunch of Donkey Kong episodes. I felt I'd take that opportunity.
She's a huge part of 3. She did a lot I think she did like half of the music, or maybe even more
Yeah,
in
I
3.
think she was one of the main contributors to 3. And I had kind of just underplayed her contribution that she'd also been there for Donkey Kong Country 1.
Mm-hmm.
And I should give her more credit for that, because I love the Donkey Kong Country 3 soundtrack, as a huge fan of
good.
that game. But yeah, I think the fact that there was kind of like this setup, like this is how Donkey Kong sounds, and like there was a few like iconic like songs from the Country trilogy that had been like associated, like the big band jazz like type thing. And Grant Kirkhope came in and was like able to do new versions of those tunes, was able to do stuff that like jived perfectly with it, and then is also able to have stuff that just sounds 1,000% like Grant Kirkhope, and it all just melds together perfectly into like an awesome soundtrack.
The best example of that is like Jungle Japes, where he took David Wise's original song and actually added pieces onto it that are very distinctly Grant Kirkhope, but fit
Mhm.
so well with that original
Yes.
composition. And it's just, it's so masterfully done. Like, I cannot even fathom trying to do that myself. Like,
Yeah.
I could talk about the music in these games all day. Like Donkey Kong 64, Donkey Kong Country, it's just, it is the music for me. I mean, I'm sure you know too, being a music guy also, which like little side note, I'm a big Zillion Million and Painless Day guy. I really like Tippy Pop a lot.
Oh, thank you. I
Anytime.
super appreciate that. Yeah, no, like Grant Kirkhope's music was so influential for me, like liking video game music and just having that become like such a huge part of my character and everything. Both between like my love of gaming and then like love of classic rock stuff and everything. And it all kind of like comes into being an influence. And yeah, just Greg Kirkhope, you're a legend, dude.
Yeah, at anytime that dude like responds to one of my tweets or something, I'm always like, oh my god, he's talking to me. Like, he's just,
Yeah.
dude is crazy. He's so good.
And he's redoing the Donkey Kong 64 soundtrack.
I saw. I can't wait till that comes out, unless it's already out and I just don't know it.
I think it's later in the fall, but he's been teasing it on Twitter, and yeah, I'm super excited for that.
I can't
That's
wait
gonna
for
be
that. That's gonna be good. It's but like Donkey Kong 64 is just like a huge part of like who I am as a human being. So it was the the DLC for the first Mario and Rabbids game.
Yes.
He brought like the DKI music back, and I was
Yeah.
like, I was levitating. Oh my gosh, floating.
Yeah.
So good.
I guess it's kind of a benefit of Donkey Kong 64 being like the black sheep of the collectathons on the N64, is that like, yeah, we hear all the time, or like there's always like throwback stuff for like banjo-kazooie. Not as much as we'd like, Xbox, but
Oh my god,
anyways.
please just make the game already. Fellas, it's what we all
or
want.
like
Just make
Mario
it.
64 is like always going to get like references in like the new Smash Bros or anything like that. But then whenever you do get something from like the Donkey Kong 64 soundtrack, or like a reference to that, or like even just Squawks like shows back up, it's like, oh, that's the underrated thing. I love it.
Yeah, even like K. Rool coming back to Smash, it's like, oh wow, I thought you guys
Yeah.
forgot about him. Like I
Yeah.
didn't realize he could still be around, but here we are. I'm itching for anything Donkey Kong in this, but I never thought I'd find myself as a Donkey Kong fan in the same shoes that Metroid enjoyers once were, but here we are.
Yeah, I guess it swaps around which franchise is currently having a bit of a dry spell. It's actually like, it's been a rumor for a while now, and it's been a rumor honestly for long enough that maybe it's just been entirely copium the entire time. But it really feels like Nintendo needs to have something major like Donkey Kong in the works, with like having the amusement park addition to like the Nintendo World stuff being Donkey Kong themed. He's a big part of the Mario movie and everything. And there's been a lot of rumors for a while that part of the team that usually does 3D Marios is working on a 3D Donkey Kong game of some sort. It would be really nice to have like a full featured, like not a spin-off, not like a mini game collection or anything, or like a port of an older game, but like a brand new like for the Switch 2 Donkey Kong game. That would be super cool to see. And so I guess my question would be, we talked about like what you would do if you were in charge of a Donkey Kong 64 remake, but if Nintendo asked you, what do you want to see from a new 3D Donkey Kong game? What would you want to see?
Oh man. Well, that would really be the next step, wouldn't it? Like we've had, the original Donkey Kong Country trilogy. We had 64, Donkey Kong Country Returns, Tropical Freeze. Had quite a few side scrollers as, compared to the 3D ones. And like what you said with like the movie and the Universal parks, which super hype for that. It's like 45 minutes from my house when they open it. I can't wait.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm jealous.
I'll be there maybe day 2, maybe not day 1. But I think to kind of get a better idea, or to at least help communicate the vision of what I would like to see from a 3D Donkey Kong, like a successor to 64, would be to look at something like Bowser's Fury, where it's kind of like, an area where you can kind of access every level from just kind of wherever you are. But thinking in the way of just, Donkey Kong is, an ape who can climb trees and swing on vines and, climb up those little vine walls they have in Returns and Tropical Freeze. So to have something that is very centric on being a 3D platformer, while also giving a lot of room to experiment with how you move around and climb on things, you can have something that's like fairly vertical. So I think of the original render of DK Isle from like Donkey Kong Country 1, where it's more of like a giant place with multiple like locations sprinkled within. I would see it as you have like a complete reimagining of the island, with minecart levels that you can access, platforming sections that you can get to, all from like just wherever you are on the island. Maybe it's gated off by like you can't quite climb this type of vine yet, or like there aren't like things for you to swing from to get to this area, and you would unlock new moves or something as you went on. It's just something that's a little more freeform, seeing as Donkey Kong can kind of, or seemingly do a lot more than Mario could in terms of platforming. I'd love to see something a little more vertical. I'd love to see something that focused on, you know, swinging on vines and climbing on trees. Because you look at something like, even, what's the game called, Jungle Beat, where a lot of the ideas from that game ended up in Mario Galaxy, which is something that's just like this super fantastical 3D platformer that has a lot of really interesting ideas in it. Donkey Kong has shown that he can kind of, come up with a lot of those ideas himself. So I'd love to see something like that, where it's a lot more of like an experimental 3D platformer that's a bit more open-ended and allows for more freeform movement. I would love that. I'd buy that game twice. I'd go crazy for it.
Yeah, I like that. I've talked a little bit on the show. It might have been the Mario 64 episode about like the Bowser's Fury and how there might be a future for 3D platformers in that kind of style. And I think we talked a little bit about Nintendo finding a way to like, how do you make like an open world like 3D platformer work, and that if anyone could figure that out, like exactly how to like balance that, it would probably be Nintendo. And just you talking about that, I honestly think that premise kind of fits Donkey Kong a little better. You'd have a bit more to work with. You connect to like different kind of areas of platforming with, yeah, like a minecart level that like takes you directly through the island to like another side or something, or yeah, just all the vine swinging, or all the Mario Galaxy shenanigans you could do if you had the 3D, like Donkey Kong is always holding on to this like surface as he goes around. I think that's really promising. Yeah.
Oh, I could see it easily. And whether it's, retro studios making it or something in-house at Nintendo, both of those studios have some really talented people working for them. And I just know that it's for as many games as we have with Donkey Kong in them, I feel like we kind of haven't really, we're we're not quite scratching the surface. It's definitely a little deeper than that, but I feel like there's still so much unexplored territory that you could
There's a lot
really
of
flesh
potential
out.
there.
Yeah, there really is. And so I want to just, see them take it all away, or take it all the way. Um, the fact that Diddy Kong and Donkey Kong, it's a monkey and a gorilla. Like, take advantage of that fact. Like, give them some trees to climb on, give them some vines to swing on, and really like add that into the world itself to make it a lot more, like, just take advantage of. I don't know what I'm saying, but you know what I mean. My brain just shut down.
I get what you mean. I've really, really enjoyed this conversation because, as I said, I will defend all of the Rareware ambitious sequels all day long. But we also kind of got to get into like a little bit of like personal stuff and like growing up in this, like during the kind of early years of video games, if you really like look at the grand scheme of things. So yeah, I think this has been a really good conversation, and I hope people come away from this being like, man, you know what? I heard some YouTubers say that Donkey Kong 64 wasn't that good, but these guys, they talked about it for an hour. They seem to really like it. I'm going to check it out. So I hope we inspire at least one person to like go and give it a fair shake.
Well, even if that's the case, I like the first video where I talked about Donkey Kong 64 is an entire piece on the importance of like loving something despite its flaws. You can still think elements of Donkey Kong 64 are bad. You can still think a lot of it's bad. But I feel
yes.
to focus more on the things that it does right, and kind of apply that thinking to all the games you play, you're going to enjoy a lot more of the games that you play, as opposed to being burnt out and being part of the games aren't fun anymore crowd.
Yeah, try to take games at like what they're trying to do, and yeah, embrace the stuff you like about them. And you obviously, you're not going to like every video game. You might hear this conversation and be like, oh, that sounds like something I'll enjoy, and then you do bounce entirely off it, but you should at least give it a shot.
Oh yeah, and that's if you don't like it, that's
and like
totally
a good
fine.
shot. Yeah,
you're wrong, but like it's fine.
Your take is bad, but we'll
there are wrong opinions, and it's yours.
And on that note, Brian, if people want to find your work online, where can they do so?
Oh yeah, I hadn't considered that. I forgot. So yeah, I make I make
Not to put you on the spot.
I forgot that I like made things on the internet. Yeah, if you want to find me, my YouTube channel is just my name. It's Brian Henken, BrianHenken. I make these sort of long form video essays on my friends say they're about why playing video games should make you sad. So if you want to take that into it, sure, that's a way to look at it. Other than that, I'm on Twitter at the same name, and yeah, that's really it. Twitter and YouTube.
And yeah, if you're watching this episode, you probably know who I am. I'm Josh Busker everywhere on the internet. Watch me on Twitch, YouTube. Stream the album that Brian said was good. Hippie Pop.
Actually do it.
Spotify.
I loved it.
Apple Music, everywhere.
I was listening to it on YouTube Music. I'm the one YouTube Music
You
user
could watch
out
it there as well, yes. Available anywhere you stream music. But yeah, thank you again, Brian, for coming on the show. I love the excuse to talk about Donkey Kong 64, and I think it was a really good chat. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We'll be back with another episode next week, and I hope you all have a lovely week. So bye-bye, everyone.
See you later. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Bye.